Hello and welcome to this Shabbos HaGadol drasha for 5781. We're going to be looking at yaknhaz. This is an acronym for the special Kiddush and Havdalah that we're going to have this year in particular at the start of our first Seder when Shabbos goes out. And the reason why we're having it is that Pesach this year starts with an unusual situation. Pesach starts on Motzei Shabbos at the end of Shabbos, so we have two prayers to do. Havdalah for the end of Shabbos, and also Kiddush for the start of Pesach. And our liturgy combines the two prayers of Kiddush and Havdalah into one, known as yaknhaz, which is an acronym for the order of this particular service. Yain, Kiddush, Ner, Havdalah, Zman. The initial letters spell out yaknhaz. Yain means the bracha on the wine, Kiddush is the Kiddush bracha, Ner is the bracha Borei Morei Ha'esh on the candle, Havdalah is the bracha of Hamavdil, and Zman is the bracha of Shechianu. We're going to find out why this order is the way it is, and also some other details about this special combination of Kiddush and Havdalah. The procedure for Havdalah after Shabbos, which coincides with Kiddush for Yom Tov, beginning after Shabbos, is discussed in Psachim Daf Kuf Beis Amud Beis, Psachim 102b. And here's what the Gemara says. Yom Tov shechol yos achar Shabbos. If you have Yom Tov which begins after Shabbos, Rav Amar Yakneh. The Rav says that the order you have is Yain, Kiddush, Ner, Havdalah. First the bracha on the wine, then the bracha of Kiddush, then the bracha of Borei Morei Ha'esh on the Havdalah candle, and then the bracha of Hamavdil for Havdalah. Shmuel Amar, Shmuel argues, and he says no, it's Yain, Ner, Havdalah, Kiddush. First you say the bracha on the wine, then we say the bracha on the candle, then we say the bracha of Hamavdil for Havdalah, and then we say Kiddush at the end. So the Gemara looks into this and sees what insight we can get into the proper order for these various prayers. Shalach le'avod Shmuel leRebbi. Avod Shmuel, the father of Shmuel, sent a message to Rebbe. Yilamdeinu Rabbeinu, may our teacher teach us. Say the Havdalah Heich. What is the order for this Havdalah? Shalach le, Rebbe sent to them. Kach Omar Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi. Thus said Rabbi Shmuel the son of Rabbi Yossi, Sha'amar, who said Mishum Aviv in the name of his father, Sha'amar Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Chananya, who said in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Chananya, Nehik, that is an abbreviation again for Ner, Havdalah, Yain, Kiddush. Yet another order, first the bracha on the candle, Borei Morei Ha'esh, then the bracha of Hamavdil for Havdalah, then the bracha on the wine, and then the bracha of Kiddush. Amar Rabbi Chanina said, Masal to Rabbi Shimon ben Chananya, a parable for understanding Rabbi Shimon ben Chananya, Lemelech sheyotze, for a king who's leaving a town, ve'eparches nichnas, and a governor of lesser rank is coming into town. Melavin asamelech, first we escort the king, ve'achakach yotzim nikras eparches, and then we go out to meet the governor. So too, first we bid farewell to Shabbos, which is more important, then we welcome in Yom Tov, which is less important. Mai havi Allah, what is the psak about this? Abaya says, Yak Zanoh, the proper order is wine, Kiddush, Zman, bracha Shechianu, bracha on the candle, and the bracha on Havdalah. You'll notice that Abaya brings in the bracha Shechianu as well, which is something that wasn't discussed previously. Perhaps it wasn't their practice to say Shechianu at Kiddush, but in the time of Abaya and Rava, it had become the accepted practice. For Rava says, Yaknhaz, Yain, Kiddush, Ner, Havdalah, Zman. The Hilchas HaKarava, the Gemara concludes, the halacha is like Rava, and this indeed is what we do today. First the bracha of Borei Morei Ha'gofen, then the bracha of Kiddush, then the bracha of Borei Morei Ha'esh on the candle, then Havdalah bracha of Hamavdil, and then finally Zman, the bracha of Shechianu. The Rashbam explains the rationale of all these opinions in the Gemara in more detail, and we can look at these now. So first of all, Rabbi Shimon ben Chananya, who says Ner, Havdalah, Yain, Kiddush. First the bracha of Borei Morei Ha'esh on the candle, then the bracha of Hamavdil, then the bracha on the wine, then the bracha on the Kiddush. So he says that Havdalah is to be said before Kiddush, because this gives the appropriate greater honor to Shabbos. We say farewell to Shabbos first with Havdalah, and then we do the brachas for Kiddush, which is the brachas of the wine and the Kiddush. And Rabbi Shimon ben Chananya actually cleverly puts the bracha for the wine between the bracha of Hamavdil and the bracha of Kiddush, because wine is associated with both of those prayers. We normally say a bracha of over wine in Havdalah, and we say a bracha over wine in Kiddush. So by having the bracha on the candle first, then Havdalah, the bracha of Hamavdil, then the bracha on the wine, then the bracha of Kiddush. We have wine associated with both the Hamavdil that came before it and the Kiddush that came after it. The bracha on the candle, however, can be separated from the bracha on the wine, because halacha is, if you don't have any wine at all to make Havdalah on, you can still see the bracha on the candle. So we see from that the candle and the wine needn't be associated together. And therefore, Rabbi Shimon ben Chananya feels you can put the bracha on the candle first, having the bracha of Ner, the order of Ner, Havdalah, Yain, Kiddush. First the bracha Borei Merei Ha'esh on the candle, then the bracha of Hamavdil, then the bracha on the wine, then the bracha on the Kiddush. Thus, Rabbi Shimon ben Chananya's rationale explained by the Rashbam. Shmuel goes basically with the rationale of Rabbi Shimon ben Chananya. He also agrees that we should have Havdalah first and then Kiddush afterwards. However, Shmuel disagrees on one point, the positioning of the bracha on the wine. Rather than having the bracha on the wine between the bracha of Hamavdil and the bracha of Kiddush, Shmuel has a different order. Yain, Ner, Havdalah, Kiddush. First, he wants to have the bracha on the wine, then the bracha on the candle. And this is because we want to have the bracha on the of Havdalah, including the bracha of the wine in the normal way. So normally for Havdalah we have Yain, Ner, Havdalah. We have the bracha on the wine, then the bracha on the candle, then the bracha of Hamavdil. And we should do it that way as well. So that's why he has it this way around. And he puts Kiddush at the end. And if the wine bracha is not associated with the Havdalah and the Kiddush together, well, that's not so terrible. Rav has a different order altogether. Instead of putting the Havdalah bracha towards the beginning, he puts it towards the end. What about the rationale of Rabbi Shimon ben Chananya, which says that we should, first of all, bid farewell to Shabbos being more important than the Yom Tov that's incoming? And Rav says, that itself is my underlying reasoning. I understand that Shabbos is more important, and therefore we want to delay our departure from Shabbos. We delay our farewell to Shabbos by putting the bracha of Havdalah last. And that means that we're prolonging Shabbos and we're showing that it's not a burden for us. So Rav says the order is Yain, Kiddush, Ner, Havdalah. First, we bring in Yom Tov. We make a bracha on the wine, we make a bracha on the Kiddush, then we have the bracha on the candle, and then we have the bracha of Havdalah. It's appropriate to put the bracha of wine before Kiddush, because we have the general principle of Todeh v'she'ena Todeh Todeh Kodim. When we have a more and a less frequently said bracha, the more frequently said one goes first. And since the bracha of the wine is said more often than the bracha of Kiddush, then we say that bracha before the Kiddush. He also gives Rashbam also gives a rationale for why we have the order of the candle and then the Havdalah, the Borei Merei Ha'esh, then the bracha of Hamavdil, rather than the way around, which is also a question on any regular Havdalah that we do. And Rashbam explains that because the bracha of Hamavdil is longer, we put it last. And I think what he means is that if we have the bracha of Borei Merei Ha'esh last, because it's a shorter bracha, perhaps it's more easily forgotten. So we make sure we get it in before the bracha of Hamavdil, which is a longer bracha, and therefore less likely to drop off the end and be forgotten altogether. So we've seen the rationale of Rabbi Shimon ben Chananya and Shmuel, who basically agree that we have Havdalah towards the end, and only argue about whether it's more important to have the bracha on the wine between Havdalah and Kiddush, or before the bracha on the candle, as it normally is for Havdalah. Rav, on the other hand, disagrees with both of them and says that our biggest honor for Shabbos is that we should delay the departure of Shabbos, and therefore we have the bracha of the wine and the Kiddush first, and then we have the bracha on the candle, and then we have the bracha of Havdalah, of Hamavdil, last. Thus, the setup so far. Then we have Abaye and Rava, who, as we recall, bring in the extra element of Shehechiyanu, of Zman. What then do we do with that? So, Abaye says it's Yain, Kiddush, Zman, Ner, Havdalah. We bring the bracha Shehechiyanu immediately after Kiddush. And there is a logic to this, because after all, Kiddush is something where we sanctify this special time. We thank God for bringing us to this time. And Shehechiyanu is also a gratitude to God for bringing us to this time. And therefore, it's appropriate that the bracha Shehechiyanu should be immediately after the Kiddush, the sanctification of this time, which makes it possible, as it were, to do the bracha of Shehechiyanu. Rava, however, disagrees with this and says we should put Shechianu at the end because Shechianu always comes at the end. And furthermore, Rashbam says in Rava, we don't really need to juxtapose Shechianu and Kiddush. The proof being that if somebody's in a very difficult situation where they can't make Kiddush at all, they can still say the bracha Shechianu because Yontov's come in. So I see from there that Shechianu doesn't need to be associated with Kiddush, and therefore I'm going to put it at the end after Havdalah, which is where Shechianu always goes. Shechianu is always on last. Thus, the argument of Abaye and Rava about the order of putting Shechianu after having agreed that basically we follow the view of Rav, as opposed to the view of Shmuel, Rabbi Shimon ben Chananya, which is different altogether, and they also have their own private dispute, as we've seen. Now we move on to something which is conspicuously absent from this Havdalah, which is Besomim. Normally we say a bracha on spices during the Havdalah process after the bracha on the wine. And yet for this Havdalah from Shabbos into Yom Tov, we don't say bracha on spices at all. Rosh deals with this, Rabbeinu Osher, he looks at this point and he gives two answers. Avol Besomim, Rosh says, Loi mitkri kola amiroi. All these Amoraim, all these opinions in the Gemara do not mention the Besomim, the bracha on the spices, or indeed many spices. Or Firish Rashbam, and Rashbam explains, Mishum de Yom Tov nami ikan neshama yasera. On Yom Tov there is also an extra soul. In other words, the point of having spices, says Rashbam, is that it revives our spirits after Shabbos has gone out. Because on Shabbos we have a neshama yasera, an extra soul, and at the end of Shabbos it leaves us. So we feel somewhat depleted spiritually, and the spices revive us somewhat. Rashbam says that when we go from Shabbos into Yom Tov, we don't lose that neshama yasera, that extra soul. It keeps going into Yom Tov. Therefore, we don't need to say the bracha on Besomim, we don't need to smell spices at this Havdalah from Shabbos into Yom Tov. Rosh objects to that, and he says, well, if that were the case, then when Yom Tov goes out, on Sunday night or Monday night, then we should have to do the bracha on the Besomim there and smell spices then. Because at that point then, our neshama yasera, which carried over from Shabbos into Yom Tov, is indeed leaving us. And yet, we don't do that. We only ever see the bracha on Besomim after Shabbos, when it's not going into Yom Tov. Why not? So the the Rosh gives a different explanation. Elo Haynu Tamo, he says, this is the reason, the machmas simchas Yom Tov, because of the joy of Yom Tov, the tanug, and the associated delights of nice food and nice clothes and so on, ein odom margish bechisrei neshama. You do lose your neshama yasera, your extra soul, when Shabbos goes out, but you don't notice it because you're going straight from Shabbos into Yom Tov. It's a different kind of simcha, and therefore we don't need to have Besomim at the end of Shabbos because the neshama yasera is leaving us. And when Yom Tov goes out, Sunday and Monday night, then also our neshama yasera needn't be compensated for because it already went, and we have the simcha instead. So that's why we don't have Besomim in the yaknhaz Havdalah. Now then, we also have to decide whether we should stand or sit for this yaknhaz at the beginning of the Pesach Seder. And there is quite a lot of discussion about, generally speaking, whether we should stand or sit for Kiddush. The Shulchan Aruch says in Orach Chaim Reish Ein Aleph If Yud 27110, he says like this: the Omer Vayachulu Umud, one should say the parasha of Vayachulu standing up on a normal Friday night. The Achakach, and after that Omer Brei Piagofen, will say the bracha Brei Piagofen. The Achakach Kiddush, after that we should say Kiddush. And the Ramah comments, Hagar, V'yuchal Lamay B'shas Kiddush, you're allowed to stand during Kiddush. V'yoseh Tov Leisheh, but it is better to sit. When we have a practice of sitting, even when we say Vayachulu, Rak only when we begin, we stand for a little while, for the honor of the name which is hinted at the beginning of Vayachulu, because we begin Yom Hashishi Vayachulu Hashemayim. We add on the two words preceding the passage of Vayachulu in the first chapter of Bereshis, with the words Yom HaShishi at the end of the creation story for Friday. And Yom HaShishi, Vayachul HaShemayim, has the initial letters of Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey. Yud from Yom, Hey from HaShishi, Vav from Vayachulu, and Hey from HaShemayim, which spells out God's name. So it's appropriate to stand for that, says the Ramah, and afterwards we sit. The Kaf HaChaim, on the other hand, quotes the Ari, who says it's better to stand for the whole of Kiddush. And Ramosha Feinstein says that even those who normally follow the view of the Ari should sit for Kiddush at the Seder, because the cup of wine that we drink after Kiddush is one of the 4 cups of the Seder that should be drunk specifically while sitting in a leaning position. So since the Kiddush that we're saying is associated with the cup of wine that we're going to be having sitting and leaning, therefore we should say Kiddush seated as well, even if normally we follow the practice of the Ari, which says that we should stand. If the Seder night begins on Friday night, then we should stand for Vayachulu, because that is testimony that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th, and therefore we should stand for that, because witnesses giving testimony in Beis Din are supposed to stand. But after that we should sit down, and since this year we don't start Kiddush on Seder night with Vayachulu, because it's not Friday night, it's Motzei Shabbos, it's after Shabbos goes out, and we have this special yaknhaz formula instead, we should therefore sit throughout. We have another issue to deal with, which is the issue of the candles. Normally on Havdalah, Orach Chaim Reish Tzadi Ches if Beis says 2982, he says, Mitzvah min hamucha levorech alavuka. It is the best practice to make a bracha, a Havdalah, not on a single wicked candle, not on a candle made of multiple wicks that are joined into one, but on wicks that are distinct from each other. They should be spaced apart. And this is the best thing to do for making bracha on Havdalah candle. The Magen Avraham goes into specifics on this. He says, if you have a wax candle, including base yachad, if there are 2 wax candles planted together, chashuv avuka, they're considered to be a torch. But if each one's by itself, lo chashuv avuka, that's not considered to be a torch. Now, the Ramah talks about adding a wick to an existing flame on Yom Tov. And he says that we may do so, if you've got a candle on Yom Tov, you want to add another wick to it, you may do so even in order to make the flame bigger and to make the wax burn out quicker so that it will go out sooner. Imagine, for example, you want to go to sleep and it's too light in the room, so you add a wick to the candle that's there, that will make the candle burn down quicker, which means it'll get darker quicker, you can go to sleep. And the Ramah says that is permitted. The Biur Halacha objects to this, and he quotes the Eli Rabbah and Hasholim who are very dubious about this, and he also quotes the Rashba, who says explicitly that we're not allowed to add a wick to a flame in order to make it go out sooner. And you can only add in the wick if your intent is to create more light, even if inevitably that means the candle will burn down more quickly. But certainly if one is intending to make it burn down more quickly, that is not permitted, as it's kibui, it's extinguishing, which is a Torah prohibition on Yom Tov and Shabbos. We're not allowed to make something go out on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Now, Yom Tov Sheni Kirchosai quotes Rosh Hashanah Oibach, who says that one should not put 2 candles together for Havdalah on Motzei Shabbos when it is also Yom Tov, as perhaps one might intend to extinguish a candle more quickly. It could lead to that. And furthermore, when you're tipping candles, the wax that is accumulated at the top of the candle might pour off from one candle onto the other and put out its flame. So we can have big issues of kibui, of extinguishing on Yom Tov, which is not permitted by the Torah. Certainly if one intends to do it in order to get something out of the wick. And even if one's not intending to do so, it's still awesome to put out a flame, even if one doesn't intend to get the charcoal from the wick. Shulchan Aruch further says, as we've seen, it's a mitzvah min hamuvcha to have a flame. It's a desirable thing to have a flame from more than one wick for Havdalah, but it's not a deal breaker. And he says that if you just have an extra light for Havdalah, and all you can have is the one candle, and it's in addition to what you normally have, that is enough. Ramosha Feinstein says further that it is permitted to have 2 candles next to each other for Havdalah, and he recommends this for Havdalah after Shabbos, which is going into Yom Tov. And indeed, we have this with the Yom Tov candles, they're next to each other, and we're allowed to use them both for Shabbos and for Yom Tov. What about lighting an extra multi-wick candle just for Havdalah and allowing it to burn up by itself? Of course, we're not allowed to strike a match in the usual way on Yom Tov, but let's say that somebody has had a yahrzeit light burning from before Shabbos, they light it before they light their Shabbos candles, and it burns throughout the whole of Shabbos, and it's still burning now after Yom Tov. So they use that to light their Yom Tov candles, why can't they also use that to light a Havdalah candle for Havdalah of the yaknhaz process, and let that bracha of Borei Mora'ish be on a mitzvah in a mocha of a multi-wick candle? Now, Rosham Zalman and Rav Yashiv argue this. Of course, the point is that one wouldn't actually put the Havdalah candle out afterwards, because as we see, we're not allowed to do that. But maybe just let it burn down by itself. It'll burn for, I don't know, half an hour or so, depending on how long it is. Then in the end, it'll go up by itself. So we're not violating Yom Tov thereby. Rosham Zalman says it is permitted to do so because we're allowed to light something for a mitzvah on Yom Tov. As we've seen, we light the Yom Tov candles from a pre-existing flame that was burning from before Shabbos, and therefore we should also be able to light this extra Havdalah candle. Furthermore, he says, the main heter, the main permission to light from an existing flame on Yom Tov is for practical Yom Tov benefit. And you'll have a practical benefit. You have an extra light in the room and make it a bit brighter. However, Rav Yashiv says there is debate in halacha about whether lighting something for a mitzvah is considered tzorech Yom Tov, for the need of Yom Tov, and therefore it is better not to do that. He says specifically we should avoid lighting a Havdalah candle in this yaknhaz process. Therefore, bottom line is, all we should do is say Borei Mora'ish while holding our hands to the Yom Tov candles, and that is all that we do. We don't pick them up and bring them together, and we don't light an extra light for Havdalah. In conclusion, I'm just going to mention a feature in the beautiful old illuminated Haggadahs that can be found, that it used to be the practice when people were decorating the yaknhaz prayer, this combination of Kiddush and Havdalah, they would draw a picture of a hunt, and you can see huntsmen and hounds and so on chasing after a hare. And this is a pun on the term yaknhaz, because in Yiddish, yaknhaz means hunt the hare, based on the German jagen den Hase. The jagen in German is to hunt, ein Hase is a hare in German. So you'll often find this little hunting scene around with the yaknhaz prayer, and that's a lovely thing to see if you like. Bottom line is, we've now learned exactly what yaknhaz is about. It's yayin kiddush ner Havdalah man, and that is a proper process for starting off our Yom Tov, our Pesach, and it's a beautiful thing to start it off in precisely the way that we ought to, knowing how it ought to be. May God give us only good things in future, and may our Shechayonu be indeed a bracha that brings us to the end of our Taurus and the beginning of a new time with good health for us all, and only simchas and good news. Thank you for listening. Good Shabbos and good Yom Tov.